Greetings, my holy human friends. This is your own Dr. Jonathan, and I wanted to create a little video for you. It's probably not going to actually be that little, but something that would contain all the main concepts that we're going to go through. Now, 5 weeks may not seem like a very long time, or maybe to some of you it seems like a long time. In either case, for the amount of material that we can cover, it's just a blink. Now, the most important thing to keep in mind about our experience is that it's really about the process. And that is not just a teaching style, but that is also a reflection of the material that we are exploring. The material itself invites us to be more in connection, more in contemplation, more in the consciousness that understands that life is never about a destination, but always about how you live the moment, the questions, the challenges, the context that you're facing. Life is not a race with a clear finish line. It's a never-ending evolution and a learning journey. So keeping that in mind, we are going to have some content that'll be a part of our discussions. And what I'm going to show you here may figure prominently in that, or maybe other things are going to come up and we're not going to get very far into this material. What I can tell you is we'll cover all of it a little bit and some of it a lot. Okay, so you don't need to watch this in one sitting. This is a private video that I'm making for you. This is not open to the public. It's hidden on my YouTube page. I actually prefer you don't share it because it's really just for you and this process we're in together. A lot of this stuff will only make sense because we're going to discuss it, and you can come back to it. So this is like your way of getting some familiarity with the terms, a first look at some concepts, or a review for some of you that have already seen these things. And then when we meet again, if you feel like you're, stuck, or you can't remember how something was said or what it's about, you can always come back to this video and see what we're doing. Okay, here we go. The first thing that I'm going to focus on, and I am going to move the camera a little bit here and there, is the basic foundation of most of our material is this 3-layer vision or version of human identity. And the basic idea is that every single one of us has 3 dimensions that are always coexisting, cooperating, and influencing each other. Now, the degree that they influence each other and the degree that they cooperate is entirely up to you. The more conscious we are about each of these levels or layers, the more conscientiously they can be connected, and the more we can be in harmony with the natural flow and design of life. So it is my experience that the human composition reflects the nature of things, the nature of life around us. And so there is a pattern or a process that is more aligned, and there is a pattern or a process that is less aligned. Now, if you do things that are less aligned, it's just called normal, right? It's just called human. But when we discover our blind spots or our triggers and traps, it enables us to step back, to be more intentional, and to choose the way we show up to each day and to each other. So the first one that you want to be aware of, the first layer to who we are, is, in my opinion, the original layer that we all come from. It is the place in ourselves that existed at the beginning of time. It is the place in ourselves that every other thing in the universe also has at the heart of who they are. So that means everyone, and I would argue, and I think physicists would agree, that everything has a subtle energy, a subtle intelligence breathing at the heart of it. Now, you can call this God, you can call this spirit, and here I'm just calling it the universal self because on one hand, sort of poetically, it's a reference to the universe, right? The idea that the universe lives inside you, but it's also the idea that everyone looks the same at this level, everyone, no matter how strange or nasty they may appear. This point of neutrality, infinite love, abundant acceptance, total presence, this lives in everyone. Now, again, we're not all aware of it. We're not all connecting to it regularly, but it's still there. Now, if you think of this as the foundation of who we are, or the foundation of life itself, well, then this emerges out of it. So from the universal, the infinite source, comes the particular. And that means planets, and that means people, and that means you. So the particular means here that you have a unique self, a true self, or you could call it a soul. I call it the essential self because it means that it is not in common with others, and it is not something that anyone else can condition or shape or give to you. It is who you were born to be and who you will be no matter what. When we are connected to the essential self, that's where we find our greatest energy, our greatest vitality, and it feels like authenticity and alignment. The universal self feels like peace and connection, okay? Peace and connection, authenticity and alignment. And then we have this other dimension to who we are, which is always in flux and changing, or at least it should be, and that is the conditional self. Now, if you want to think about it almost like a layer one upon the other, then the conditional self is your outermost layer, right? That means that's the part of you that everyone sees. That's the part of me right now that's talking and picking words one over the other. That's the me that decided to wear these clothes and not other clothes. It's our situational actor, okay? So that means it is based on conditions. It's responding to conditions. But the problem that most of us have is that this, rather than serving the authentic self, which is arising from the universal self, this ends up running the show. And that's a problem because most of our conditioned self happened a long time ago, predominantly when we were little kids, and predominantly when we were under stress and duress. It could have been violence, it could have been trauma, but it also could have just been overwhelming situations or feelings of confusion or disappointment. In the end, we're all going to have some basic weak points where we have moved towards looking outwardly for identity and clarity rather than inwardly. So that's the kind of part of yourself that thinks a good person should be this, a good leader should be that, a desirable person should do this, a repulsive person should do that. People expect this of me. You know, all these ideas of self rather than core feelings of self. Now, it's true, the conditional self can reflect the essential self, and ultimately it should be. In an ideal scene, what we really have here is the universal self is the home of awareness. The essential self then becomes the personal expression of authenticity. So the universal energy and awareness flows through our particular channel or creation, and then it continues up. And if we're accountable, then it shines through the conditional self. So we can have a kind of process, and that's what I'm going to invite you to in this class, or group, whatever you want to call it, that we are constantly returning, emptying ourselves of expectations, attachments, judgments, and so on, opening ourselves to a clear, neutral, curious, open-hearted, open-minded place. From that place of deep listening, we sense what is truthful for ourselves, what resonates as authentic, and then it shapes the conditional choices. Now, what you probably already know is that most of us have so much emotional fuel behind the conditional self that it becomes very hard to get back to the essential self. The conditional self, when we are under stress and duress, will always take over again, which is kind of wild, right? Because it was formed when we were under stress and duress. So it's almost like an echo of the past. That's kind of cool in a way. That means that when a feeling, not a situation even, although if it's a similar situation, it'll be stronger, but if a feeling of stress and duress arrives in the present, we will typically activate the conditioning from our earliest experiences of stress and distress. That's wild. If we don't get conscious of it, if we don't hold it in awareness and compare it against the authentic self, it will take over. And that's where habit and addiction form, particularly because the conditional self, when disconnected, is not fueled by the energy of authenticity and connection. It's fueled by other people responding the way we want. It's fueled by manipulating situations to affirm a false sense of self and security. Okay, so this is really the first piece that I wanted you to be aware of, and this is one of the foundational models I hope you will come back to again and again, which is that you, in all things, decision-making, relaxation, relationships, start with the neutral, the big love, the big perspective. Go then to the personal, the unique needs, unique expressions, unique talents, and so on. And then finally to the expression of them, right? It's a beautiful model. It's a beautiful way of being if it flows this way. But when it goes in reverse, it's very difficult to spend much time in the essential self or the universal self. Now, one of the things that I want to point out, though, is that in this life, in this human experience, ultimately, the home place that's going to navigate most of our day-to-day experiences is really the essential self. So when we are thinking about thinking, when we are aware of thinking, when we're thinking about our feelings, or when we're aware of our feelings, then we are in this kind of felt sense, this place that is very much dualistic, but is purely self-referencing. And when I say purely, I mean not selfishly, not egocentrically, but is sensing how all life and experiences resonate or conflict with the true sense of who we are. So this picture indicates that it's normal, if you can see this, it's a heart with arrows going up and down around it, that while we move through the day, we may not always have the time to get back into the universal, right? To be blissed out and in a non-dual state of vast empty awareness. It's a little hard to get on a bus or drive the car like that. But this is the anchor right here. And it's anchored in the heart, of connection and compassion with people and with life. So it's a constant moving process. In other words, while we may initiate a decision, a meditation, a day, universal, essential, conditional, we then need to go out into the day, and we want to be rooted in a way of being that is always returning to a sense of authenticity, liberated and given permission by a sense of the universal, and then expressed in a balanced way through the conditional. So I hope that makes sense. I think what I'm trying to share is that these three parts are always with you, okay? But when in process, they flow like this. And when engaged in everyday life, then you're going to pick and choose which to emphasize more or less depending on the moment, but always returning to that sense of what is true to the self. The self, not as the selfish self, the ego self, the survival self, but the self as your unique expression of spirit. We're good? Okay. So what I want to do is move on from there. I'm going to move this little camera over. And I do know that I have this funny little light shining on this. This is obviously not a professionally produced video, but I think this will work for you anyway. You can see the keywords: safety in the middle, control, judgment, attachment. So here's how it relates. The conditional self, when it's destructive or addictive or distracted, is one that is not driven by vision and values, by connection to spirit and self. It is driven by an impulse to safety and survival. Okay? So when we are stressed out, when life gets chaotic, when you have pandemics and political upheaval, most of us will have a safety issue activated. And in that area of your life, or possibly in all areas of your life, you're going to find a pronounced movement towards attachment, wanting things a certain way, judgment, being against things that aren't the way you want them, and control. And that is the behavioral activity to make things your way. Okay, so they're all versions of the same expression, which is a desire for personal control over the reality, to make yourself comfortable and have other people, places, and things the way you want them to be, rather than being spirit-centered, in which case you would be open, curious, right? You'd follow that other process. And instead of being attached, judging, and controlling, you would work on being a co-creator, which means you know that no matter what you're trying to control, health, lifestyle, money, work, relationships, at best, you're a co-creator. You're one of many forces and factors making that happen. And that puts in place a certain amount of humility and flexibility. Instead of judgment, we move to curiosity. And curiosity is about learning from every situation and being open-minded and open-hearted to whatever it is you're experiencing. And then finally, where we have attachment, we are cultivating the energy of letting go. So attachment moves to letting go, judgment moves to curiosity, control moves to being co-creative. And these are things that we can actually do behaviorally, right? So a lot of this happens unconsciously. Attitude, emotion, action, control, judgment, attachment. But when we become conscious of these impulses, we can choose to let go. I mean, as soon as you show up to a meeting, you got your intentions, but you release your attachments. Judgment. As soon as you find yourself becoming hostile, judging of another person or decision or situation, see what you can learn. Move to curiosity. And again, when you are in the position of taking action, rather than doing so with the intention or conscientiousness of control, you do it with this gentler perspective, this kind of shared power. Rather than power over, it's power with. And we recognize that no matter what we try to create, no matter what we're tasked with leading, we will never have 100% control. So this is a very important model if we're going to avoid being stuck up here. All right, I'm going to share a couple more things, and I'm going to try to make these ones shorter. If we need to get into them in our group, we will. But in terms of homework and things that you want to be doing, let's say on your own, then I want you to look right down here. Now, for me, this is really the wholeness model. So this one's really about identity. This one's really about reactivity and action in daily life. This is about how we spend our time in a given day, in a given week, or throughout a year. Now, when we think about all of the imbalance in our lives, it's absolutely true that if we understand the layers of the self and the habits of reaction and control, we can create greater peace. But remember,